Mark Levin here. After any presidential election, I take time to reevaluate my own financial investments. That's why I continue to invest in gold for help with my financial protection. When it comes to gold, I only trust Advantage Gold. They're a top gold company in America, and that's who I turn to for my own gold purchases. Call them now at 800-900-8000. That's 800-900-8000 for a free gold investment kit. And see if you qualify for up to $1,000 in free silver. That's 800-900-8000. And tell them Mark Levin sent you. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
So as we sit with what is hopefully a very Merry Christmas season for you, for your family, Happy Hanukkah to you. What is it that you've been doing over the past day or so? Whatever it is, there's a really good chance it hasn't been as much as the former and future president of the United States. As we learned, Trump, he was working pretty hard all throughout the day yesterday. And yes, he was truthing as well, which drove some people crazy. We're going to talk about the rebels, the establishment, and the return of Trump, and what needs to happen over the next 25 days, as we are now just 25 days away from sanity. Sounds pretty good. 25 days away from sanity. Maybe. And the rebels have something to do with it. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, and it is always an honor and a pleasure being here with you. I am not in the underground bunker. No, I sit 7 feet above sea level in a building in West Palm Beach that was once had its roof ripped off by a hurricane. So nothing that is too terribly impenetrable. And nevertheless, but just miles away from Mar-a-Lago, where nonstop Trump has been working. Been working since before the election. Been working since immediately after the election. Was working on Christmas Day yesterday, trying to get his cabinet in place, trying to get his agenda in place, trying to get his own party in the right place so that 25 days from now, we're not going, why isn't Trump able to carry out his agenda the way that he said he was going to be able to? He recently said approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 20th, his government's going to be fully operational. But will it be? And if you walk back to Trump's first term in office, what really was the biggest hangup? Why wasn't he able to gain more traction faster? What the biggest frustration for so many of us those first 2 years where Republicans had control of the Congress, got Trump. I mean, yeah, some amazing progress was made on some real important issues, tax policy and the like, and the battles over the border were underway, which Trump eventually won, and Biden completely undid. But what was the biggest hangup to getting more done quickly? His own stinking party. You know, upon taking office nearly 8 years ago, with that Republican majority, Trump's biggest obstacle legislatively, the GOP establishment. You walk back, what was it? It was the leadership in the House, Paul Ryan, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. They slowed his agenda down. And rather than being ready to roll on day one of the Trump administration, they were largely unable to come to a consensus about how to legislatively move forward with that Trump agenda. Remember, they didn't even expect him to win, Ryan and McConnell. So as a result, meaningful votes on key pieces, Trump's agenda, they didn't happen for a while, right? Didn't happen for months, actually. And even then, the GOP majority's leadership that unsuccessful in keeping their caucuses together in key votes. And if you think back, it wasn't until July 28th of 2017 that you had the first major legislative action that was taken, the first major Trump agenda item that came to a vote, and that was the repealing of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Yeah, you're talking about this July 28th. And what happened then? You had 3 establishment Republican senators, led by the late John McCain, voted against the repealing and replacing of Obamacare, sinking that first key piece of Trump's agenda that came to a vote. And then it wasn't until December 19th, 11 months into Trump's first term, they finally passed his tax plan, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And even then, you had 16 establishment Republicans who voted against that, which turned out to be incredibly successful. So when we take a look at where we stand as we are headed towards Trump 2.0, as we're headed towards sanity 25 days from now, we have people that are trying to do what? Exactly what was attempted at the start of the current Congress. You got people that want to challenge the House Speaker vote. You have Republican infighting. Rather than Republicans, elected Republicans, up and down the House and Senate getting behind Trump and his agenda, what do we hear about? I don't know about this particular cabinet pick or Mike Johnson. He's just got to go. And that worked out so well with the whole fiasco with Kevin McCarthy, right? Really worked well, holding up his vote for all those votes. Really worked out well, going through the whole process to throw him overboard. Really went well to bring in Mike Johnson, which was something that was pretty much an unwinnable situation from him and has continued to be. Why? Well, Mike Johnson really wasn't going to be able to do a whole lot differently than Kevin McCarthy was. I mean, you can like them, you cannot like them, but the biggest thing is the immovable object. Democrats control the Senate. Joe Biden is president of the United States. Nothing about that is great. Nothing about that is going to end up being good. So what you end up having is Mike Johnson stuck between this rock and the hard place. And you get people that decide they want to throw him overboard. And so these congressional rebels, which have been responsible for occasional dysfunction in the current Congress, were told in no uncertain terms by President-elect Trump when he visited orientation that they were not to be dysfunctional in the next Congress. Something I thought was really instructive as we're continuing to hear about the infighting, as there's a question right now about whether January is going to come around and we're actually going to have a House Speaker that has decided to get Congress sworn into session, which then can officially confirm Donald Trump as president of the United States. You want to talk about January 6, 2020? What about January 6th this year if we can't even get a House Speaker together to be able to run the process to confirm Donald Trump's election win? And for Republicans to be in control of the House potentially and have that scenario. It is beyond unacceptable. It'd be far worse than the nonsense we saw with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell going back 8 years ago. So when you take a look at Trump, he's been very clear since the election with how this thing needs to go. He took time before he went to the White House to meet with President Biden, begin formally that whole transition process. He told them that he's with Mike Johnson all the way. And he also said directly to the House Speaker in front of the Republican conference, he said, Mike, you're going to have a tremendous year, a tremendous 2 years. So right now you have reports out. Well, since the CR last week, you've got Trump that's upset with Mike Johnson. Okay, maybe. Have you heard Trump say that he wants to throw him overboard? No, what you most recently heard him say is that, Mike, you're going to have a tremendous year, a tremendous 2 years. Trump is still with Mike Johnson, and until and unless he isn't, Republicans need to get on board. There's no time for dysfunction. These 25 days, each one of them is important. So important that Donald Trump was working his butt off on Christmas Day because he wants by 2 o'clock on Inauguration Day to be in place to hit the ground running. And what Trump said when he ended up meeting with the Republican conference before he ended up getting with Biden, he looked around the rest of that room and he said, get it all done. Talking about his agenda. Trump said, get it all done and unify. And at that point, you had the dysfunctional rebels that fell in line. You might remember you at that point had Mike Johnson being challenged. There was talk that he was going to be challenged that day for a continuation in Republican leadership. And Johnson did end up winning that vote. Nobody challenged him. And that just happened last month. So here we have, a little more than a month later, a different version of a similar thing. People who like to hear their names called, that like to think they're standing on this solid moral ground, that are doing the very thing that Democrats want them to do. If you're Democrats heading into the next Trump presidency, what is the single best possible outcome? Well, a single best outcome would be absolute dysfunction in Republican leadership to where they can't get their act together, where they can't lead on Trump's agenda, right? Exactly what we're hearing, possibly holding up the speaker vote. What we're hearing with, maybe getting ourselves into another ridiculous saga. The bottom line is that Donald Trump needs the speaker that he says he needs. And if that's Mike Johnson, you get your butt in line and you support Mike Johnson. And you realize that it's going to be better when Republicans have control of the House. It's going to be better when they have control of the Senate and when Donald Trump is president. As opposed to what? What are you going to do? I mean, the people really want to play this game anyway. Was your whole angle just going to be a partial government shutdown in perpetuity? Like going back to, Kevin McCarthy and that whole fiasco, just staying like a permanent state of a partial government shutdown because, we're not going to accept the reality that we're compromised because Democrats have the Senate and Joe Biden is president. Elections have consequences. Well, this time, the consequences are good if the rebels allow it to be. So you talk about the rebels. You got the establishment. While Trump ended the rebel rebellion in the House last month, and now we've got it going again, we ended up seeing a lot play out in the Senate side. In the end, you ended up having John Thune, the semi-establishment McConnell candidate that ended up getting the nod. He'll be the next Senate Majority Leader. One thing that we're seeing is that, you know what? He looks like he's going to get behind Trump's cabinet nominees, which is what needs to happen. Every single one of them. The most important window of time, the window of time when we get the Senate sworn in until January 20th. So you can begin to confirm those nomination picks. So you can have Trump's cabinet in place by January 20th. So if John Thune, who many were concerned about from the establishment side, is positioning to give Trump what he wants, it is absolutely absurd that so-called conservatives in the House can't give Donald Trump what he wants in terms of a House Speaker. And so as we are taking a look at these next 25 days where we can return to from this insane world we've been living in back to sanity, it starts with the people who were elected within Donald Trump's party doing what Americans voted for Donald Trump to be able to do. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Did you see what the Federal Reserve did literally days after President Trump's victory? It's lowered interest rates by a quarter. Do you know why it did that? It's worried about the economy. It's worried about the fact that jobs aren't being created. We're seeing all kinds of shifts in our portfolios, and it's important to stay aware. That's why I'm urging everyone to diversify and consider gold as one of your financial shields. Now, gold has weathered every kind of economic downturn throughout history. I want you to call Advantage Gold. They're the best of the best, folks. I've dealt with all of them. They're the best. They're my gold company. 1-800-900-8000. Get a free gold investment kit to see how you can get started with gold. I recommend Advantage Gold to anyone who's serious about protecting their wealth, and that's you. Call 800-900-8000 for your free gold investment kit, and you can even qualify for up to $1,000 in free silver. That's 800-900-8000. Call them now. Tell them Mark Levin sent you. You'll be very happy with them. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
House Speaker Mike Johnson emerges bruised from last week's battle over government funding. Anywhere from 4 to 10 Republicans could oppose Johnson. Thomas Massey of Kentucky is a no. Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris is undecided. Corey Mills of Florida is fed up.
Johnson has to do his best to start finally showing that he's going to do what he says and not just continue to try and make deals with Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, okay, so what do you expect to happen here? What do you expect to happen when Democrats control the Senate and Joe Biden's president of the United States? And again, there are some good men, theoretically principled people here that are like, yeah, and Mike Johnson, he stinks on wheels. Okay. You know who doesn't think so? You know who hasn't said so? You know who has called on the Republican conference to get behind Mike Johnson? Donald Trump. And you know why? For the past 8 to 10 months now, Mike Johnson has been regularly at Mar-a-Lago. Why? Because as Trump is working his butt off, harder than any member of Congress that is sitting there, getting sideways, about Johnson or whatever else, when Trump is working on Christmas Day, who's working on his agenda with him? Mike Johnson. It's the reason that he stood behind him. I've used the expression that perfect is the enemy of good. Well, look, you're not going to get what you want when all you have is a narrow majority in the House, the Democrats have the Senate, and Joe Biden is president of the United States. That's kind of a sucky setup. The best you could do is just try to make the suck less bad at that point, which is basically what McCarthy tried to do, basically what Johnson has tried to do. Again, unless all you're going to do is just like a permanent partial government shutdown. Again, a strategy, but that would be the strategy. Anything else is just a bunch of nonsense. Anything else is just a bunch of hot air. Until Donald Trump says that you go a different direction, you go with who Donald Trump says that he needs. And Mike Johnson, at this point, not John Thune, incoming Senate Majority Leader, or anybody else, is the single most important person in Congress to Donald Trump's agenda because he's the one that's been working on it with him. And for a long time. All that actually matters at this point isn't, the somewhat crappy CR that got passed last week that some people, including maybe Trump, weren't thrilled with. What matters is that we get a Congress sworn in immediately. We get a House Speaker decided immediately, and that they get their butts working on giving Donald Trump exactly what he needs, all the tools he needs, so that 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 20th, his government is completely operational and doing everything he's been working, really at this point, for years to put into motion. No more nonsense like what happened 8 years ago, or worse. The absurdity of absurdities here. If you don't get to a House Speaker, if you can't get Congress sworn in, you could actually end up in a scenario where Chuck Grassley would end up being president on January 20th. It's absurd. We don't need to be traveling down this path. Give Donald Trump the tools that he asked for. Give him what he needs to be successful. And give him Doge, something I'm excited about. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
The markets are volatile. They're shooting up wildly only to drop without warning. The Fed just cut rates yet again, this time by a quarter point. Why? Because the Federal Reserve is not confident the economy is strong. In fact, last month only 12,000 jobs were created, all of them in the government. That's why I'm telling you again, diversification is crucially important. And diversification with gold is what I do. And the company I use, and I've used many, the best one is Advantage Gold. Call them now at 800-900-8000 for a free gold investment kit to see how gold gold can help you diversify your investments and take advantage now. Now, gold has been helping to protect and grow wealth for people for thousands of years. And in these times, it can be more crucial than ever. When it comes to gold, I trust Advantage Gold. They're one of the top gold companies in America. They're who I turn to when I purchase gold. Call them now, 800-900-8000. Call 800-900-8000 now for a free gold investment kit to see how gold can help you with your investment portfolio, a.k.a. your bank accounts, your paycheck. And when you do, you could qualify for $1,000 in free silver. That's 800-900-8000. Folks, don't wait. Call them now, 800-900-8000, and tell them Mark Levin sent you. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
Where Americans meet to defend liberty and defeat tyranny. Call the Mark Levin Show now at 877-381-3811.
We recognize, members of Congress, including members of the House, recognize that Donald Trump took a bullet to the head. He survived all these lawsuits. He's the greatest comeback in political history, and the American people gave him a mandate. We need to back President Trump, and if President Trump is going to back...
Yeah, so we need to back President Trump. And what you had Rep. Eric Burleson say of Missouri is that if he's going to back Mike Johnson, we need to back Mike Johnson. And that is what Trump has said most recently. The one thing, no matter who it is, I mean, if it's not Mike Johnson, pick your person in the House. Unify. Get behind that person to achieve Trump's agenda. But I do think Trump knows better than anybody else who is best positioned to lead on his agenda starting on day one. So we don't have a repeat of what we had 8 years ago, where it took him 97 days just to get his cabinet confirmed. You talk about the first 100 days. First 97, he was just trying to get his cabinet confirmed in the Senate. Took him to the end of July to get his first major legislative item to a vote. And then that ended up failing because there wasn't Republican unity. There's no time for that nonsense, no time for that garbage anymore. There's so many things that we can be excited about. It's one of the things that this holiday season, as we kind of transition, you come out of Christmas Day yesterday, we're still in the holiday season, Hanukkah for many, and you start to look towards what's next. And you can get excited. You for the first time in a long time, we can get excited about what the future holds in 25 days. But that's only if there actually is Republican unity. That's only if people actually do what is necessary so that Trump can achieve his goals. Like, for example, implementing Doge. About the most exciting thing that I've heard of in my lifetime is Doge, is the Department of Government Efficiency, is Elon Musk and Ramaswamy and what they're looking to do. You know, I mean, from putting a man on the moon to connecting you anywhere around the world to pretty much anything you want to watch. We know what Elon Musk can do. And when Elon took control of Twitter, I like pointing this out. You take a look at when Elon took over Twitter a couple of years ago. How many shadow banning employees were forced to go? 80%. Elon Musk got rid of 80% of the Twitter employees that he inherited, converted the company to X, created a better platform. We're going to see what happens when the world's most successful entrepreneur tasked with taking out the trash in Washington, D.C. You know, Trump has said a lot of things about Elon in this Doge role. He's called him the secretary of cost cutting. When you have Elon Musk, maybe the greatest entrepreneur ever, but certainly of this time, when you have him tasked with right-sizing the federal government, what do you think that looks like? If Elon was able to find that 80% of Twitter's employees were expendable, what percentage of federal government agencies employees do you think are expendable? And just a quick history lesson for you, because I think this is important too in the greater context. Through 1865, we had 5 federal government agencies, no federal income tax. Your 5 government agencies, the Department of War, Department of State, Department of Navy, Department of Treasury, Office of the Attorney General. So for the first 76 years of our history, that was it. Only 5 departments. Since 1865, we've added 425 federal government agencies. The proliferation of them started after the federal income tax was adopted in 1930. So isn't this interesting? You take a look at the timeline here. We're going to have a permanent federal income tax put in place in 1913. Then we start seeing, oh, look, we got all this money now, and we're going to create all these government agencies. You had Woodrow Wilson and his progressivism that really started the ball running on expanding government agencies. Then you had the New Deal and FDR in the 1930s, and boom, over time, here we are, 430 largely unaccountable, unnecessary federal government agencies, $36 trillion in debt in the process, bloated model, unsustainable, and every step of the way, it erodes our freedom. Every piece that is expanded within your federal government, you get a bit more of your liberty that is chipped away. But rather than viewing it that way, realizing that there's a tangible cost that we all pay for the money that goes out the door in the federal government, I mean, how many of those 430 federal government agencies do we really need? How many could you name? And here's something else. The average American household spends $15,200 annually just to service the cost of the salaries for the people who work at these 430 federal government agencies. So yeah, Elon Musk is positioned to eliminate the deep state, like literally eliminating their positions. But you know what has to happen for any of this to actually begin to take place? A Congress. You actually have to have a speaker decided so you can have Congress sworn in, so you can confirm Donald Trump as the next president of the United States, so you can get the actual process of confirmations for cabinet positions underway so that Trump is able to hit the ground running on January 20th with all cylinders. All these things need to happen. There are battles that are worth fighting, and there are battles that need to be won. The real battle is to take down the bloated federal government, take down so many of these nonsensical federal government agencies, to take down the progressivism that has eroded your liberty for well over 100 years. Not, oh, look at Mike Johnson. I didn't like that continuing CR. Go get him. That's stuck on stupid. If you really care about Donald Trump's agenda and making America great again, you don't get into a circular firing squad. You don't do the McCarthy thing again. There's nothing to be gained there. It's exactly what the Marxists want. It's exactly what the left wants. You can't give it to them and then, well, it's in the name of conservatism. I'm very principled over here. Very principled. So I'm going to make sure that Donald Trump does not get his agenda as a principled conservative. You see, it doesn't wash. It does not wash. All right, let's go to Tony in Jersey, listening on WABC. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian Mund. Great topic tonight. You know, let's sit down at the table and see what work has to be done. That's what our president-elect is doing. That's what we want our Congress to be doing. And here's my summation. If they can't do what they're supposed to do, then right now, that means that they don't understand what's on the line here, that all that we went through, that, you know, President Trump went through, our country's been through, even in the past week, Brian, I was just so beside myself, mourning how they burned that woman on the A train in Brooklyn because this illegal immigrant got through, and nothing's been changing. We are holding on, you know, much like our first president did, because if it wasn't for George Washington, we may not have had a country. We don't have many people like him that are serving in our government. That
it is a very important point. Tony, you're exactly right. I appreciate the call, and there are so many important and instructive points. And by the way, coming up in the next hour, in the second and third hours, I'm going to walk through the elimination of the Department of Education, the actual Trump border plan, because we know conceptually the Trump border plan, but what is it really? You know, a lot of people I've realized aren't even familiar with Trump's 20-point plan to save America. He's got one that he's already working on operating against once he is in office. It's what is everything that's been happening that he's working on, even on Christmas Day, is geared towards. So we're going to get into the elimination of the Department of Education, the border plan, and specifically what needs to happen, as those are all really important topics. And you're right. I mean, this week in particular has been like something else because, for many of us, we are in holiday mode, enjoying Christmas, Hanukkah with our friends and family. And then you take a look at the news cycle and it's brutal. It's just horrific. You take a look at what happened on the subway and you go, again, how can this continue to happen? That we have an illegal immigrant, been around for years, coddled by the system, getting, government freebies, getting government-assisted housing and everything else, that's being put in a position to murder a vulnerable woman on a subway, to burn her alive. And then also the reminder about how broken people are. Where you have people that stand around and watch it. In many ways, that's more alarming because you can understand like evil. Most of us get good and evil, right? And you're evil if you're setting a woman on fire, fanning the flames to murder her. But that's understandable. The people who then stand around, I can't even begin to understand that. How is there not anything within you that goes, wow, I got to do whatever I can to try to help this woman, rather than, wow, look at what's happening here. And we've seen this many times, but you're right. I mean, there's so many different examples in the news cycle of all this happening. It's all part of what needs to be dealt with ASAP. And the only way that's dealt with ASAP is if Trump has the pieces in place to achieve his agenda. You can't do it otherwise. Let's go to Joe in Los Angeles. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hello. Very simple. I think you're giving Mike Johnson too much credit. Trump has done what he has to do to kind of pull him along. But Mike Johnson is one of those Washington politicians who is not quite used to dealing with the evil that he's dealing with. And instead of him putting pressure on the other side, asserting himself, reminding everyone that the so-called government shutdown canard, the government shutdown is actually only a government slowdown of 16% of the government. It's nothing to be feared. It's nothing to worry about. And as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't mind if they sold it right, shut the damn government down until Trump comes in. Now, as I say, Mike
okay. So a couple.
Johnson
Let me hold you up there just to kind of walk through a couple of things with you real quick. So. And I mentioned this, a partial government shutdown. I mean, going all the way back to, the start of this Congress, that could have been a strategy. You could go with the partial government shutdown. So just so I'm clear on your position, going back for, basically the past 2 years, your strategy with Republicans having the narrow majority in the House, Democrats having control of the Senate, and Joe Biden as president, your strategy would have been the partial government shutdown in perpetuity.
No, until Trump comes on board, the way it is right now.
Okay, so you wouldn't have been before, but you are now. So
pressure on them.
So should we have thrown McCarthy overboard then? Should that whole fiasco have played out at the start of the current Congress, and then should the whole fiasco have happened to throw him overboard over a very similar thing? And then should we have gone through the fiasco to get to Mike Johnson in the first place?
Well, this is what you're purporting, but that doesn't necessarily have to be what it has to be.
Yeah, it actually does. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, there are two sides of stories, one side of facts. That's what it is. You're either supportive of the principled argument, and you just mentioned, hey, partial government shutdown until Trump gets in. I'll walk past that, and I'll walk with you on this for a moment. What happens if there is a partial government shutdown until you get to Trump?
Nothing.
Do you realize? That's right. Including, by the way, not having Congress sworn in January, which means there is no President Trump. Just to kind of lay this out in front of you, because there can't be dysfunction at the level that you're talking about. There cannot be come January, or Donald Trump is not president of the United States. If the House can't get behind a speaker and you can't begin the session, Chuck Grassley would end up being the president of the United States. I'm not going to go through all the machinations right now to explain how that we would get to that point. But if you have the dysfunction you're talking about, if you don't get behind somebody, Donald Trump will not be president. That is how important this actually is. And so I hear what you're saying. And by the way, I don't care if it's Mike Johnson. But the point is, if you want to get to Donald Trump and you say you want to get to Donald Trump, who is Mike Johnson's biggest supporter to date? It's Donald Trump. If you say you support Donald Trump's agenda, then why not get behind the person that Donald Trump says that we should get behind? I would think he would know better than any of the rest of us. Any altruistic Republicans, theoretically, in the House that are playing this game. That's my point. And by the way, if Trump comes out tomorrow and says, hey, it's not Mike Johnson anymore, it's Massey or it's a pumpkin. Okay. If he says, make the pumpkin the Speaker of the House, that'll help me the best with my agenda. Give him the pumpkin. But as long as it's Mike Johnson, which it has been to this point, you give him Mike Johnson. But you can't have that dysfunction and get to Donald Trump. That's the important point here. And I appreciate the call. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Did you see what the Federal Reserve did literally days after President Trump's victory? It's lowered interest rates by a quarter. Do you know why it did that? It's worried about the economy. It's worried about the fact that jobs aren't being created. We're seeing all kinds of shifts in our portfolios, and it's important to stay aware. That's why I'm urging everyone to diversify and consider gold as one of your financial shields. Now, gold has weathered every kind of economic downturn throughout history. I want you to call Advantage Gold. They're the best of the best, folks. I've dealt with all of them. They're the best. They're my gold company. 1-800-900-8000. Get a free gold investment kit to see how you can get started with gold. I recommend Advantage Gold to anyone who's serious about protecting their wealth, and that's you. Call 800-900-8000 for your free gold investment kit, and you can even qualify for up to $1,000 in free silver. That's 800-900-8000. Call them now. Tell them Mark Levin sent you. You'll be very happy with them. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
Investigators say the suspect in this case still had the lighter in his pocket when he was arrested. Investigators say he lit a woman on fire and then even fanned the flames with his jacket before he ran off. Sebastian Zepeda, he's now charged with first-degree murder and arson. He was walked out there by authorities here in New York City yesterday. This comes in the death of the woman he's accused of lighting on fire while she slept on a New York City subway the other day. Authorities have not yet identified that woman. NYPD sources say she appeared to be homeless, and they're doing everything they can right now to track down any family members to talk to them about what happened.
Yeah, it's got to stop, right? Horrific. Just unreal that we continue to hear about stories like this brought about by illegal immigrants because of your Biden administration, because of your Marxists, because of your leftists that want to collapse this country. We have 25 days before we can have a restoration of sanity in this country. That only happens if Donald Trump is able to carry out his agenda. First and foremost, we have to have a Speaker of the House to be able to do that, because until there is an agreement on the Speaker of the House, you cannot commence Congress. Don't commence Congress. Well, guess what? Donald Trump will not be confirmed as president of the United States, a situation that would make January 6th of 2020 look like nothing in comparison. It is unacceptable by every measure that Republicans would have a majority in the House, majority in the Senate, Donald Trump is incoming president, and not be able to fulfill their responsibilities there. So the bottom line, doesn't matter what a Massey thinks is the right thing to do, or whomever else, wants to get on their high horse. Matters what Donald Trump says he needs to achieve his agenda, what he needs to make America great again. If he says that's Mike Johnson, which to date he has, then it's Mike Johnson, period. If it becomes somebody else before we get there, okay, well, it becomes that person. But that's the way this game is played. And everything else is just a bunch of noise and dysfunction that should not and better not play out. Now, speaking of Trump's agenda, we're going to talk about it. His 20-point plan to save America, eliminating the Department of Education, his border plan. Got all that coming up next. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin.
This segment of the podcast is exclusively sponsored by Pure Talk. Pure Talk offers great coverage and can save your family money on your wireless bill every single month. Go to puretalk.com to find the plan that's right for you. Thank you again for listening, and thank you so much for this sponsorship, Pure Talk.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
There's a big push by the outgoing president to get as many weapons out the door to Ukraine before he leaves office. President Biden condemned the Christmas Day attack by Russia on Ukraine's energy systems, which killed 7 people. President Biden said the Christmas attack was to, quote, cut off the Ukrainian people's access to heat and electricity during winter. The U.S. has sent $175 billion in aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, and how's that worked out? Fox's Chad Pergram there, and we are 25 days away potentially from sanity being restored. When President-elect Donald Trump, when Trump 2.0 takes office, and when he begins to implement his 20-point plan to save America. Now, as I was talking about throughout the course of the first hour, the first and most important thing is that you have Republican unity. We can't have the circular firing squad. We can't have the nonsense that played out 2 years ago with McCarthy, then with Johnson. And then if we have that in about a week, we got problems. And Trump's agenda will be slowed down. There's no question about it. So right now, every single day is extremely important. And that's why Donald Trump was working on Christmas Day throughout the day, because every single day is that important. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. I'm the host of the Brian Mudd Show out of WJNO in West Palm Beach. You can catch the Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcast, at Brian Mudd Radio socially. And by the way, would love to invite you to join my wife and I on the vacation of a lifetime. We put together an amazing vacation package coming up next November. There's an opportunity for just 35 listeners to be able to join us. If you've thought of something you wanted to do in Ireland, it's on the itinerary. We've got all the bases covered. It will be phenomenal. We're going to be spending time in London as well, in addition to Edinburgh on the backside of the trip. And so you can get all the information, WJNO.com, right there on the homepage. You can also email me, brianmudd@iheartmedia.com. Would love to have you. Now, one of the things I realized, actually, even earlier today, was a lot of people, a lot of Trump supporters, don't even necessarily know what's in Trump's plan. What is the most recent Trump plan? I mean, conceptually, we get a lot of it. But did you know, for example, that his agenda is called Agenda 47? He has it on his website. It's been there for many months now. And the 20-point plan that, again, he intends to begin to implement at approximately 2 p.m. on January 20th starts with this. Number 1, to seal the border and to stop the migrant invasion. Seal the border, stop the migrant invasion. No doubt, day one priority. It is the number 1 action item on Trump's 20-point plan to save America. Number 2, right behind that, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. So you stop the bleeding by putting back in the Trump policies from the first term, the remain in Mexico. You do what you need to do to start getting the border wall cranked up again. You then put the orders in to carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. That'll be led by incoming border czar Tom Homan. His third action item, to end inflation and to make America affordable again. Number 4, make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far. So no more the nonsense to where, we play footsie with OPEC, as we've done with the Biden administration. No more buying oil from Venezuela, where you have all the bad actors that end up profiting off of the United States at our literal expense. I mean, the most absurd thing was, you might remember back at the onset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were still buying Russian oil. It took a while for the Biden administration to stop that. We were actually funding, and by proxy still are, the war in Ukraine that we are then supplying on the back end. It's kind of like, in Israel, we will supply Israel with some of the resources they need. And then also, it's Palestinian aid. Right. Because Hamas doesn't get all of that. They are making use of those resources. And buying Iranian oil isn't funding the proxy forces, isn't funding Hamas, the Houthis, etc. Right. So all that stuck on stupid nonsense stops. Again, right away. Number 4 action item by Trump, Agenda 47. Number 5, stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower. We were very close to being in that place the first time around. USMCA, been a huge success. He's going to get right back to those policies yet again. And you've already seen a lot of this happen. A lot of companies have already begun to bring back manufacturing since November 5th, knowing what's coming with tariffs that Trump will implement to exact outcomes, which again were successful the first time around. So much so that, many of them Biden left in place. Number 6, large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips. And of course, the no tax on tips has been extended to no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. And Trump, even more recently, as we're talking about, Elon Musk and rethinking the way that we do government and we go about government, been rethinking about whether we should have a federal income tax at all. Again, we did not have a permanent federal income tax in the United States until 1913. And guess what? If we cut a lot of the BS government agencies that exist out there, who says that we need a federal income tax? Part of the reason why people, you can't do that. I mean, there's no way. Where would all the money come from? Well, I don't know. If you dramatically reduce the size of the federal bureaucracy, you don't need as much money to fund it, do you? What I've said for a long time, and I really, as an exercise, think it should happen. You get every member of Congress together. You got 535 members of Congress. You put them all in a room. You sit them there for a day. They have no internet. You give them a pen and a piece of paper. And they write down the names of every government agency they know. And if even one member of Congress can name a federal government agency, just one, then it stays. Again, there are 430 of them. There were 5 at the time of our country's founding. There were 5 for the first 76 years in our country's history. 430 now. How many could you name? How many could even the members of Congress that fund these government agencies name? So yeah, if no member of Congress can even name your agency, you go away. What do you say about that? And I bet we would eliminate most of the federal government agencies by going through that exercise, just as an aside. Number 6, again, the tax cuts, which are super important because, Trump's tax policy that was passed in December 2017, that is set to expire next year. Speaking of Republican dysfunction and needing to unify and get on board with Trump's agenda and who he deems to be necessary to lead the House, to be the next Speaker of the House. Number 7, defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. Amen. Number 8, prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and the Middle East, build a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over the entire country, all made in America. This one I think is really instructive in a lot of ways. I mean, first and foremost, the one thing that kind of holds the world that is on the brink of World War III together right now, I think at all, is just the knowledge that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. And therefore, we know that he means business. We know we're not going to be able to get away with the crap that we've gotten away with, over the past 4 years. So that kind of holds things together, just his existence. Restoring peace in Europe and the Middle East. It's so easy to forget where we were at the end of the Trump administration. Jerusalem recognized finally by the United States. Didn't end up causing any problems like we were told it was going. In fact, what did we even end up seeing? Saudi Arabia and Israel that were on the verge of normalized relations for the first time ever. Iran and check. And with a lot less money, so they couldn't carry out all of the terror that they funded ever since. Russia held in check. But instead, what have we seen ever since? Well, the bad actors have all acted badly because, again, China isn't just China. China is Russia. China is Iran. China is Little Rocket Man in North Korea. China is Cuba. China is Venezuela. It's Nicaragua. All those countries are interconnected, the new Axis powers. And what have we done? Well, through the Biden administration's policies, we've emboldened all of them. We've enriched all of them. And many people don't realize this, but Russia is richer now than they were before they started the Ukraine war. Man, those sanctions that Biden put in place really worked out well, right? And why? Well, because of the trade that Russia is doing with China and the other Axis powers in particular. Number 9, end the weaponization of government against the American people. That's pretty worthy. Number 10, stop the migrant crime epidemic, demolish the foreign drug cartels, crush gang violence, lock up violent offenders. Again, a lot of that connected with his first 2 agenda items as well, but it has to do with putting an end to the sanctuary policies as well to root out the illegal immigrants that are being sheltered by these sanctuary locations that don't just hurt people within those locales, within sanctuary states and sanctuary cities, but as we've seen, they do tend to migrate to other places and wreak havoc everywhere across this country, making everybody less safe. Number 11, rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., making them safe, clean, and beautiful again. Number 12, strengthen and modernize our military, making it without question the strongest and most powerful in the world. As we talk about Agenda 47, Trump's 20-point plan to make America great again. Number 13, keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Number 14, fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes to the retirement age. Number 15, cancel the electric vehicle mandate, cut costly and burdensome regulations. Number 16, cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. Number 17, keep men out of women's sports. Number 18, deport pro-Hamas radicals, make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. Number 19, secure our elections, including same-day voting, voter identification, paper ballots, proof of citizenship. Number 20, unite our country by bringing it to new and record levels of success. And again, this is possible. We know Donald Trump can do this. The question is if the Republican Party will unify to allow Donald Trump to be able to do this. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
You voted big government out and efficient government in. Well, now it's time to trim the fat from big wireless. If you're still on the other big name providers, I have one question. Why? Pure Talk, my cell phone company, gives you the exact same service on the exact same towers with better customer service because they're based right here in the United States, all for half the cost. That's right. There's simply no need to spend $85 or $100 per person on your wireless bill. Not when you can get unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data with mobile hotspot, just $35 a month. My friends, the average family of 4 could save about $1,000 a year with Pure Talk while enjoying one of America's most dependable 5G networks. So cut the fat out of your wireless bill. Switch to Pure Talk by going to puretalk.com/Levin. Again, puretalk.com/Levin, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month with Pure Talk, America's wireless company.
Almost 3 years ago, we were having about 1,000 apprehensions a year under the Trump administration. When this administration took over, the highest watermark we have had was a 417% increase in illegal alien apprehensions right here in Terrell County. In that same year, which was fiscal year 2022, we had a 469% increase in gotaways.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been the story in so many places across the country, and we've seen the impact of it, including most recently the New York subway burning. That was Texas Sheriff Thaddeus Cleveland, and all across this country, we've seen the impact, the dysfunction of the Biden administration. 4 years, 25 days away now from the return to sanity if Republicans unify. We are going to be getting into border policy specifically. One of the things that I've been most excited about that is part of the conversation of the Trump agenda, the changes that we are looking towards, addition by subtraction, eliminating the Department of Education. Bottom line is that the single best idea I've heard is getting rid of the Department of Education. Now, on occasion over the years, I've shared the brief advice that I was given pretty early in my radio career, top radio executive, and he paid me a visit, and I wanted to pick his brain. I'm like, well, as long as, I can have a conversation with him, what is it that I can do to improve? What do you think that I need to be doing that'll make me better? And his response was, Brian, just stop doing the bad stuff. Stop doing the bad stuff. And it's a short, simple, and brilliant truism that you can apply to just about anything in life. The best and the most efficient way to improve in any aspect of life, actually, just to identify the bad stuff that you're doing and stop it. If you think about it, getting rid of the bad stuff instantly makes whatever you're working on better. So you're talking about the border. It's why Trump's number one agenda item, number one point in his plan, is to secure the southern border. Number two, the deportation. But number one, you just stop doing the bad stuff, right? Just stop doing the bad. And when we talk about education, question for you. What percentage of Americans are completely satisfied with the state of K-12 education in this country? According to Gallup, the answer is 9%. 9. And only a total of 43% find the current state of K-12 education to be even somewhat satisfactory. So we're talking about levels that are consistent, and in some cases worse than even what the average American perceives when it comes to border policy and illegal immigration. So anyway, this means that 91% of Americans think we can do better in education in this country. And they're right, because their country has done considerably better before. We actually did a lot better before, prior to the creation of the Department of Education. So you take a look right now, only 27% of Americans currently hold the view that the country is heading in the right direction. Hence, Trump's historic win, what we're looking towards in 25 days. But there's no shortage of bad stuff that comes out of Washington, D.C. and at our literal expense. It's why on all fronts, we need to stop doing the bad stuff. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin.
You voted big government out and efficient government in. Well, now it's time to trim the fat from big wireless. If you're still on the other big name providers, I have one question. Why? Pure Talk, my cell phone company, gives you the exact same service on the exact same towers with better customer service because they're based right here in the United States, all for half the cost. That's right. There's simply no need to spend $85 or $100 per person on your wireless bill, not when you can get unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data with mobile hotspot, just $35 a month. My friends, the average family of four could save about $1,000 a year with Pure Talk while enjoying one of America's most dependable 5G networks. So cut the fat out of your wireless bill. Switch to Pure Talk by going to puretalk.com/Levin. Again, puretalk.com/Levin, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month with Pure Talk, America's wireless company.
Mark Levin, the research arm of conservative media. Call in now, 877-381-3811.
We've seen horrific things. The woman that got burned alive by an illegal criminal immigrant on the subway. We've seen, all these, young women raped and murdered across the country.
Yeah, that is Rep. Claudia Tenney, all among the bad stuff that's got to stop. Again, as we take a look at Trump's 20-point plan to save America, number one is securing the southern border. Number two, the mass deportation plan. And number 10 actually has to do with sanctuary cities and getting these cities secure, putting an end to the BS sanctuary policies as you continue to have cities and even states like Oregon, Oregon rolling out their sanctuary, just making it's an information packet to local governments, you see, so they understand that we're sanctuary here and they can stand up to the big bad Trump administration and protect the warm and fluffy, the real warm and fluffy migrants that are only here to do really good things, because that's all that happens, really good things. So, yeah, got to deal with them too, because this just the warm and fluffies don't just do really good things. In fact, they cost us a heck of a lot of money. In addition to the dramatic increase in crime, a greater than 900% increase in non-citizen crime that's happened in the United States under the 4 years of the Biden administration. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, and as I'm taking a look at things that are on the table for the incoming Trump administration, talking a bit about DOGE, the U.S. Department of Education and eliminating it. Now, in my extensive coverage of education, mental health issues over the years, I've talked about it on this show quite a bit, over time. Mark Levin most certainly has. But over the past 2.5 decades, I've laid out the case this way. If you go back to 1980, the first full year of operations, Department of Education, the average outcome for Americans second in the world, only Australia ranked ahead of us. You had religious holidays, references, prayers that were generally acceptable. Over the next 20 years, entering the 2000s, all that was taken away. We experienced, you had the Department of Education that made sure that everything was as federally prescribed. We experienced a 300% increase in diagnosed depression. At the same time, the United States slid from second in grade school education outcomes to 17th. Then over the next 20 years, by the way, fallen to 27th. It directly coincided, all of that, with the creation of the U.S. Department of Education, the implementation of its various agendas. You take a look at what some of the other outcomes have been. According to the Pew Research Center, only 6% of Americans didn't identify with any religion or faith in 1980. More recently, that figure has tripled. But even that threefold increase in atheism doesn't tell the whole thing. Over 26% of those under the age of 35 don't believe in God. This is not entirely a coincidence, again, with the Department of Education. The proliferation of faithlessness connects directly to the rise in mental health issues in society, which connects directly to the timetable of the onset of even school shootings, starting with Columbine in '99, because that was the first generation raised in the current faithless public school system under the Department of Education. So what we've received, much worse education results, a proliferation of mental health issues, subsequently more violence. Other than that, it's been great. It's really been just sunshine and lollipops and a lot of good, smart students coming out of our school system, right? It's been a damning record for the U.S. Department of Education. Students have become far less globally competitive, have experienced a rapid rise in mental health issues, manifesting in worse outcomes, schools that aren't as safe. And bonus, as taxpayers, we pay $80 billion annually to fund that kind of failure. Now, when you take a look at the opportunity to rethink government, when you talk about Musk, Ramaswamy, Doge, Ramaswamy, when he was running for president, talking about this regularly. He actually addressed it in a speech in Washington, D.C. when he was running for president. He said, we will shut down the U.S. Department of Education based on existing legal authority. He said, I'll take the $80 billion spent by a useless, toxic agency, put that money in the pockets of parents to send their kids to better schools. It's quite sensible, actually. So, yeah, get rid of the Department of Education, turn education back to the states and local governments, and you can take a look at the money that is spent for the Department of Ed, turn that into school vouchers, which work. Quoting Trump, he said just that. He said, we will move everything back to the states where it belongs. They can individualize education, do it with love for their children. So you've got Trump that is rallied behind this. You have Ramaswamy that actually campaigned on it. You've got Elon Musk, who is driving part of this agenda with Doge. So of all the things that we can get done as we take a look at government efficiency, the Department of Education needs to go. Again, we just need to stop doing the bad stuff to get better, not complicated. The U.S. was a world leader in education before the creation of the U.S. Department of Education in 1980. Gone nowhere but backwards since. Cut it out. Stop doing the bad stuff. And from a point of practicality, not only could taxpayers save money while getting better educational results in return, but the influence of teachers' unions, other political organizations that infest all D.C. bureaucracies that taint educational agendas, the curriculum and classrooms, all that nonsense goes away as well. And just as we did not have a permanent federal income tax in the United States until 1913, we didn't have a need for a U.S. Department of Education for the first 204 years of our country's history. There isn't one right now either. So, this is all part of what needs to happen. Everywhere the government has stepped in and gotten bigger, these federal bureaucracies, have we seen better results or have we seen worse results? And it's pretty much a consistent story. All right, let's go to the phones. Got Susan in upstate New York. Susan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian. You do a fabulous job at rapid fire here, getting through what is these very crucial things that, we can't rest on our laurels, and January 20th can't come fast enough. But I wanted to just take a little moment. You really spoke great about the juxtapose from, we have, the current Speaker of the House, Johnson. But I wanted to just say a little thing about Kevin McCarthy and why he was disposed of that isn't really well spoken about. That he was responsible. First of all, he was a Republican speaker under with a Democratic president. Okay. And now Johnson with Trump, this is a whole different scenario. But McCarthy was responsible in 2023, after agreeing with the Congress to go back to regular order, and he was responsible for negotiating the debt ceiling with the Democrats. And he completely folded. There was no debt ceiling. It was uncapped, and he allowed this our Congress and country to go into a debt spiral that is unsustainable completely.
Yes, Susan, a couple things there. You're right. You are right that he negotiated that. You're right that he did end up caving over what he had stated he was willing to do previously. But a couple points. First, on, the debt ceiling question. With the continuing resolution that was just agreed to, that you have some Republicans now saying they're going to throw Johnson overboard. They're not going to stay with him for speaker. They're not going to go along with what Donald Trump has said, which is to unify behind Mike Johnson as the next House Speaker. The reason that Donald Trump is not happy entirely with what, and he's been quiet on this, with what just went through with that continuing resolution, was actually because it didn't raise the debt ceiling, the very thing you're talking about. It didn't. He wanted a deal that would have held that out there, raised the debt ceiling for another 2 years. And that was not included in the plan. So a couple things about this. Because we continue to run the government at these enormous deficits, we continue to run into the debt ceiling. And Trump has a lot of great ideas. But even as he is looking to reduce the size of government, dramatically to reduce government agencies, I mean, the first thing is DOGE is not tasked with completing its agenda until the 4th of July, 2026. So while I do hope a lot of the agenda items for DOGE are going to take place before then, you're not going to have that final plan that is presented and the massive cuts until perhaps a year and a half plus into the Trump administration, at least by the deadline there. But essentially, Trump was asking Mike Johnson in this most recent continuing resolution to get the very thing that Republicans threw McCarthy overboard for. So I do think there is again, a point of pragmatism here. And McCarthy, like Johnson, far from perfect, right? But how is it going to be any different? Because in the end, when you have a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives and Democrats have control of the Senate and the president of the United States is a Democrat, you're not going to get what you want. You just aren't. It is not possible to get what you want. So there was never a situation where where McCarthy was going to be able to deliver exactly what conservatives would want to deliver and have any semblance of a functioning government without a permanent, basically, partial government shutdown, which, as I was talking about earlier in the show, that's a strategy. You can do that if you want to. I don't know that it would actually go over, especially since the president of the United States has broad authority in deciding what is most impacted and what isn't in a partial government shutdown. There's no doubt that Biden would do everything he could to try to make Americans feel the impact of the partial government shutdown to then turn around and blame Republicans. But that was the point about Mike Johnson. And I talked about this at the time. Okay, so now you want to throw McCarthy overboard. What is Mike Johnson going to be able to do that's going to be any better? And the people who threw McCarthy over, they wanted Mike Johnson. So here we are. And now Mike Johnson's not any good. We got to get rid of him. No, he's in the exact same situation. You're never going to get exactly what you want. But again, if you are going to draw the kind of equivalency there, actually, McCarthy was thrown overboard for the very thing that Donald Trump asked Mike Johnson and Republicans to get into the deal. And Democrats would not go along with it. Here's the irony of this. Trump would have been happy with the CR that was negotiated if there had been Republican unity, but there wasn't. And Mike Johnson needed Democrat votes to get a continuing resolution done at all and not have a partial government shutdown, that could be ongoing until who knows. Anyway, it's important. As always, two sides of stories, one side of facts. And let's go to Tony. Tony in Des Moines. Welcome to the show. Hey, Tony, you there? All right. I think we don't have Tony at the moment. It looks like we had lost him. So, yeah, as we're taking a look at what comes next, we've got to carry out Trump's agenda in 25 days until we return to sanity. Well, we can't do that unless there's Republican unity. We'll talk about Trump's border plan and what comes next. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
You voted big government out and efficient government in. Well, now it's time to trim the fat from big wireless. If you're still on the other big name providers, I have one question. Why? Pure Talk, my cell phone company, gives you the exact same service on the exact same towers with better customer service because they're based right here in the United States, all for half the cost. That's right. There's simply no need to spend $85 or $100 per person on your wireless bill, not when you could get unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data with mobile hotspot Just $35 a month. My friends, the average family of four could save about $1,000 a year with Pure Talk while enjoying one of America's most dependable 5G networks. So cut the fat out of your wireless bill. Switch to Pure Talk by going to puretalk.com/Levin. Again, puretalk.com/LEVIN, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month with Pure Talk, America's wireless company.
I like to say that, this administration has spent more time fighting Governor Abbott than it spent fighting the cartels in Mexico. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we will continue to see people crossing this portion of the border. We will continue to see the CBP-1 app and the CHNV programs being utilized until President Trump comes into office.
And as we know, day one in office, he intends his first two agenda items have to do with the border, to secure it, and then to begin the mass deportations. And 3 of the top 10 agenda items on his 20 agenda items to save America have to do with the southern border, have to do with illegal immigration, the abuse that's taken place across this country. And I laid out, that agenda, the Agenda 47, because a lot of people, even Trump supporters, don't know about it, don't know specifically what's in it, in what he is working on and has been working on really for years now, but about the border plan as well. There's actually a whole lot more there than I think most people realize as well. And we know at this point, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem going to be the next Homeland Security Secretary. We know that we're going to have Tom Homan as the next border czar. But what about the actual policy, the specifics to the Trump border policy? I mean, buckle up, because there's a heck of a lot here. It starts with restoring all Trump border policies and to fully secure the border. That is the first agenda item on the border specifically. That means restoring the Remain in Mexico policy, the ending of catch and release programs, restarting construction of the southern border wall. Next up, a total ban on taxpayer dollars used to free illegal aliens and criminal penalties for administrative noncompliance. The third item that is part of the border plan, executive order implementing a travel ban and pausing refugee admissions. Next up, Trump has an executive order on border security and immigration enforcement. And by the way, most of these executive actions, we're talking about day one executive actions here. So we're talking about EOs, and next up, a presidential memorandum. Presidential memo on the extreme vetting of foreign nationals, all part of Trump's border plan. A presidential memo to create a national vetting center. Trump is going to carry out an executive order to unleash, as he puts it, interior immigration enforcement. An executive order to block federal grants to any sanctuary cities. A federal and presidential moratorium on the military activities that are not consistent with immigration policies in this country. Presidential memo ordering DHS to train National Guard troops to assist with border enforcement. A presidential memo to end catch and release at the border. Presidential proclamation suspending entry across the southern border outside ports of entry to bar asylum access and abuse of that system. There's actually a lot more here. I'll bring in the rest of it and tell you what it means to you next. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
I want Hochul. I want the mayor of Chicago, the governor, all these sanctuary cities that are speaking out against President Trump and myself running this deportation operation. I want you to watch that video and know how this young lady suffered, what a heroic death she had. I want you to listen to the Laken Riley tape for 17 minutes.
Yeah, so, Tom Homan, incoming border czar. The horrors that we continue to see on display as we have had a week of Christmas, of Hanukkah, but also of horrors across the country as we continue to see the failed Biden agenda, his policies continuing to ruin the lives of people and forcing you to pay for it. So as we talk about sanity being restored in 25 days, which requires Republican unity, we talked about that quite a bit in the first hour. It also requires being efficient with government, taking a look at where we need real fixes in government. And with Doge coming in, the Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk, with Ramaswamy, the opportunities that present themselves, talked about the need to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education and how we have a real opportunity to do it. But also laid out Donald Trump's agenda, his 20-point agenda, which a lot of Trump supporters I found weren't fully aware of. And then even with his border plan, just how much meat there is to it. It's not as simple as just, remain in Mexico and let's get the border wall going. So much more to it. And I'll pick up there in just a moment. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. I'm the host of The Brian Mudd Show out of my home station, WJNO in West Palm Beach. Check out The Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcast. And also, you can follow me socially at Brian Mudd Radio. Also, would love for you to check out and see about joining my wife and me on a vacation of a lifetime. Coming up next November, we have an opportunity for 35 listeners to join us with a trip to Ireland, where if you have thought about things that you would want to do in Ireland, it's going to be on the agenda. Everything done right, done well, covering all the bases. We'll also be spending time in London and in Edinburgh as well. You can get all the information for this, the homepage, wjno.com. You can also email me if you have any questions or hard time finding the information, brianmudd@iheartmedia.com. Now, as we are talking about Trump's border plan, it's talking about all the items that go into it and the day one executive orders and presidential memos that are all part of it. You have over 20 pieces just in the border plan. And I left off talking about executive orders to block federal grants to sanctuary cities, presidential memo to order DHS to train National Guard troops to assist with border enforcement. Day one, ending catch and release at the southern border. Presidential proclamation suspending entry across the southern border outside of ports of entry to bar asylum access. Also, an executive order requiring the U.S. government to prioritize the hiring of U.S. workers in the administration. And that has to do with all immigration programs as well. Executive order on aligning federal contracting and hiring practices with the interests of American workers. A presidential proclamation suspending chain migration, visa lottery, all non-essential foreign workers. A presidential proclamation suspending chain migration. I mentioned that. The presidential proclamation on the suspension of entry of immigrants who will financially burden the United States healthcare system. I'm going to hit on that here in a second about what this means to you and how much we've been paying for all this nonsense as well. Presidential memo to cut off immigrant access to the welfare state. Again, this is all part of the Trump border plan, and most of this is going to kick off on the first day in office. Work with state and local law enforcement agencies to identify illegal immigrants for deportation. Get full cooperation of neighboring governments to dismantle the cartels or else fully expose the bribes and corruption that protect these criminal networks. Deploy all necessary military assets, including the U.S. Navy, to impose a full naval embargo on the cartels to ensure they cannot use our region's waters to traffic illicit drugs to the U.S. Order the Department of Defense to make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, other covert and overt actions to inflict maximum damage on cartel leadership, infrastructure, and operations. Again, this is all part of the Trump border plan. Designate the major drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, cut off the cartel's access to the global financial system, ask Congress to ensure drug smugglers and traffickers can receive the death penalty. And a partridge in a pear tree. That's it. That is just the border plan. As I have been talking about Trump working harder than anybody else in government, he's really been doing this for years. You can tell that while he's been out of office, he's been working on the plans to put in place for when he would get back into office. And you understand as you go through the level of detail and something like his border policy, just his border policy that I laid out the last segment of the second hour and here to start the third. That didn't just happen. This is all part of what he wants to have ready to go at 2 o'clock, approximately in the afternoon on January 20th. And again, it's why it's so important that there is Republican unity to make sure that it all happens. Need to cut the nonsense. Now, in terms of what the border policy will mean to you, some of this is evident, right? Not having illegal immigrants pouring over the southern border, we understand the implications there. If we can have mass deportation, we understand what that may mean as well within our communities, because, of course, every community, your community is a border community now. But the other thing has to do with the day-to-day impacts, some that you see, some that you don't. I'm a numbers person. I talk about there being two sides to stories and one side of facts. One that, to me, is probably the single most remarkable of all the failures of the Biden administration. It's not, the 40-plus year high inflation we ended up hitting, any number of the other failures of his. It's this one. You are 914% more likely to be the victim of a crime perpetrated by a non-citizen compared to 4 years ago. There are a lot of ways we can talk about numbers. However many illegal immigrants have made their way into this country, non-citizens, as the Biden administration likes to call them. The warm and fluffy asylum seekers, because they're all just good people. They're not people that are trying to abuse the system, take advantage of the Biden administration, then get taxpayer good. No, they're just warm and fluffy migrants, all out to do good. However many there are, here's what we know. You are 914% more likely to be the victim of a crime perpetrated by a non-citizen compared to when Trump left office. And then you pay a heck of a lot more to be that much more likely to be a victim of an illegal immigrant. 63% of non-citizen households use at least one government welfare program. The average net cost to taxpayers of each illegal immigrant during the duration of the time that they're in this country is $68,000. You always hear the arguments, they do the jobs that Americans won't do, and they're a real positive to our economy, everything else. B stinking S. They're full of crap, everybody who says that. It is an absolute lie. They are not only not less likely to commit crimes than Americans, which is another lie that is put out there, but the average net impact of every single non-citizen in this country, every single one of them that is not here illegally, is $68,000. And it costs you, as a federal taxpayer, $1,156 per year. Now, how stuck on stupid do you have to be? How dumb do you have to be to force taxpayers to pay $1,156 more in taxes per year, to be 914% more likely to be victims of crime by those people? Got to be as dumb as the Biden administration, right? But there's actually more to the story as well, because with a minimum of 11 million illegal immigrants allowed into the country, according to the Biden administration's own count, with the actual totals that we know are likely higher, and a lot of estimates go well north of 20 million. But even just using the Biden administration's numbers, at an average of 2.5 people per house, That's a minimum of 4.4 million affordable housing units that have also been taken up by those who shouldn't be here anyway. You know, we talk about the affordability crisis, housing crisis, everything. 4.4 million affordable housing units taken up by illegal immigrants. You get rid of them, how much of that affordable housing crisis goes away, in addition to the money that we are paying? So Trump's border plan, his mass deportation program, 1, it lowers crime. 2, it lowers inflation. 3, and consistent with that, you have more affordable housing. Number 4, a lower tax burden. 5, lower strain on government assistance programs. I mean, it is phenomenal. What the actual impact is to you. Every single aspect of it. All those details that he's been working on. All the hard work he continues to put into getting ready on January 20th to do what he needs to do that he wasn't allowed to do the first time around. Because it took him 97 days just to get his cabinet confirmed by the Senate. Because Paul Ryan in the House was not ready to carry out his agenda. We can't end up in that same place again. We can't have Republican infighting and, Mike Johnson is the devil. And I can't, I'm a principled conservative. I can't get behind him. Bull crap. I tell you what, if Donald Trump says you get behind him and you're a Republican in the House, you get behind him. If he changes his mind and he says somebody else, you get behind that person, because the policies, the agenda that Trump has laid out for us, it's not only what this country voted for, it's what this country needs. And that is principled conservatism, not somebody who likes their name in the press and likes to sit there and grandstand and pretend that they're doing great things by their constituents, because you are not if you are hurting Donald Trump's agenda. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
When you looked at President Trump enforcing the international sanctions on Iran, they were only able to sell about just under $8 billion worth of exported oil, Iranian oil. But under Joe Biden, when they didn't enforce those sanctions, they were making $43 billion. And you can sow a lot of discord, mayhem, and mischief with that $35 billion, and of course also advance your nuclear program.
Yeah, I mean, all these stuck on stupid policies that exist out there with this administration. Why in the world would we be buying more oil from OPEC? Why, when the U.S. was energy independent, would we have gone back to doing that? Why would we have put Russia in a position to enrich themselves? Why would we be buying oil from Venezuela once again? All these interconnected new Axis countries. It's almost like you would have to undermine the interests of the United States to do this. Almost kind of like it's intentional. On the one hand, you can take a look at Biden and go, man, just really incompetent. On the other hand, maybe there is more to the story. Regardless, that's where we are. And in 25 days, we have a chance to restore sanity in this country, but not just the restoration of sanity. We have the opportunity to do something that principled conservatives have wanted to do our entire lives. The most exciting agenda that we've ever had laid out. The opportunity to have the greatest entrepreneur of our time, maybe greatest ever, running a government efficiency operation that can take a look at government and see what needs to be cut. Somebody who, when he bought Twitter, took a look at the organization and said, man, this is a rat's nest, and cut 80% of the employees of Twitter. Changed it to X, created a better product by getting rid of 80% of what was there. How much of the bloated federal government would be better by simply being gone? How much more liberty would you have with less federal government, the 430 government agencies that exist? How much better off will you be by simply a restoration of the rule of law, the reestablishment of our southern border, the mass deportation plan by Trump so that you're not a victim of crime, so that affordable housing is used for actual Americans who need affordable housing, so that we are not paying money we don't have to put all these illegal immigrants on government assistance programs. There is so much that we can be optimistic about looking towards the new year. But it only happens if there is Republican unity, given the very slim Republican majority that is going to be present in the House as we get to January. This cannot be understated. You continue to hear the nonsense that is out there, the infighting. Donald Trump sets the agenda here. If he says Mike Johnson's the guy, Mike Johnson's the guy. If you are in a district where you have a member of Congress that is not behind Trump's agenda and they are a Republican, you tell them they damn well better get on board with Trump's agenda because that's your agenda. You know, so many of these people rode Trump's coattails to simply be in the positions that they're in Congress to begin with. And so now is not the time for Republicans to do a different version of what they did to Trump and what they did to themselves 8 years ago. We have a chance to make history. We have a chance for the most exciting 2 years of a presidency that we've had in our lifetimes to restore this country to what it needs to be. But it only happens if Trump gets to do it. And if the premise of anything is false, anything built on that false premise is too. And you take a look at the way the federal government run, false premise. You take a look at the idea that the country is better off if we're locked in a speaker battle and we don't have a Congress in place to confirm Trump and get him going. That's a false premise. Time to do what needs to be done. Time to unify. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one, Mark Levin.
Mark Levin, the thunder on the right. Call in now, 877-381-3811.
When you looked at President Trump enforcing the international sanctions on Iran, they were only able to sell about just under $8 billion worth of exported oil, Iranian oil. But under Joe Biden, when they didn't enforce those sanctions, they were making $43 billion. And you can sow a lot of discord, mayhem, and mischief with that $35 billion, and of course also advance your nuclear program.
Yeah, no doubt. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin as we are taking a look at what the opportunities are 25 days from now as we look to return towards sanity, having broken down President Trump's 20-point agenda, having gone through his border plan, having talked about the opportunities that exist in DOGE and to reducing a federal government that was founded with only 5 government agencies, but that now has 430, and what the implications of that may be. And by the way, why it is so incredibly important as well. You know, something that is alarming and remarkable as we take a look at government efficiency. I was looking at this earlier today. What we spend money on, what the federal government is spending money on, the number one expense is Social Security. 20% of all federal government spending, Social Security. Number 2 is now Medicare at 16% of what we spend. Number 3 is national defense. Number 3, national defense, which is actually the only really constitutional mandate of our federal government. Federal government isn't there to do for us. It's there to keep us safe, there to provide, safety for the American people, for the establishment of this country. Number 3, 14%. But you know what's now the 4th biggest expense in this country? Interest. Just servicing our country's debt. 13% of federal government spending is now just servicing the federal debt. And so you start to take a look at, all these numbers, and they work until they don't, right? So government efficiency isn't just something that, is a good idea. Limited government conservative principles. It is something that is absolutely essential, because one thing that for a very long time in this country, you've had a lot of conservatives talk about, but seemingly hadn't really come to fruition. Debt issues. right? Because a lot of budget hawks would be like, hey, we got to have balanced budget and everything else. But then, what we run these deficits and the debt, and people are like, oh, but things are working okay. Now, there are kind of two prongs to that. The first is, hasn't necessarily been working well, because the number one reason why we reach, for example, 40-plus year high rates of inflation, why? Well, it was artificial government spending, the artificial demand that was created by the government spending. Right? So we spiked inflation because of this government spending. And the other thing is, as you take on more debt, dollar retains less value, and that adds to inflation as well. But the next big piece to this is very much like the Weimar Republic that led to Hitler coming into power in Germany. The numbers work until they don't. It's just like somebody who runs a lot of debt. You can run up as much debt as you want in your household, and that works until it doesn't. And when is it that it doesn't work? It's when you can no longer make those minimum monthly payments, right? You can keep going backwards and backwards and backwards, maybe for years. The point where you can no longer even make those monthly minimum payments, that's when stuff starts to hit the fan. So as you now take a look at just the servicing of our debt, that is nearly the size of the entire defense budget. Boy, we're starting to get close to a place where that's problematic, because we haven't been anywhere close to that until now. When you talk about just servicing the debt being almost the expense of Medicare, that really tells the story, not far from Social Security. So the other point is that the Trump agenda is a necessity, not just to make America great again, but to restore this country fiscally and ensure that it's going to be here, for not just generations to come, because we'll often talk about, well, your kids are the ones who are going to be paying for that. Now, stuff, it already has hit the fan with inflation more recently, and stuff really can start to hit the fan much more quickly when the numbers are that large. At some point, they don't work anymore. All right, let's go to the phones. We have Rick in New Jersey. Rick, listening to WABC. Welcome to the show. Hey, Rick, you there? All right, so we will roll over to Chris in Boca Raton nearby. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ryan, thanks.
You bet.
Awful on that trip. I might be interested. Can you hear me?
We got you. Yep.
Okay. Good evening. So talking about going back to what Vivek said about the authority to eliminate DOE, I believe what he's referring to is the combination of the Chevron and the EPA decision. One talks about the ability of an agency to create law, and then the other talks about Congress funding whatever its funding bill, but that it's up to the executive to dispense that money. So if there's not a need, then there's no need to dispense that money, ergo eliminate the department, and you can return that money to the Treasury.
That's exactly right, Chris. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely on point there. And just to kind of pick up with what you're saying, there are two ways you get there. A lot of people have had these questions. Okay, well, how is it that you eliminate, these federal agencies, whatever, DOJ makes recommendations about? How is it, that you can really exact meaningful change? And there are actually two ways to get there. Some of it is constitutional, along the lines of what you're talking about, to where there is executive discretion. And some of these agencies could be shut down through executive discretion, as the federal government and every agency under it is there under the leadership of the President of the United States. But the other way to get from here to there is simply funding. And so, Congress provides all the funding. If you have a federal government agency that isn't funded, what's going to happen to it? I mean, if the employees go away, there's really, in effect, not going to be that government agency there anymore. So yes, there is a two-pronged approach with this, and that absolutely is part of the strategy. And again, with Republicans having control of Congress, if they unify, these can be carried out. Trump can do what he can do on his end. You can have Congress fund only the agencies that make sense and at levels that make sense. And this all needs to be part of the strategy. And again, it's why it's important there isn't this infighting in GOP circles, especially with a narrow majority. You need to have people that are unified. Otherwise, you're not going to get the Trump agenda carried out. You're not going to have this opportunity, which is a historic opportunity in front of us right now, realized. And again, we saw what happened 8 years ago. We can't let that happen again. But in some ways, what's being talked about right now is even worse, because at least 8 years ago, you had a Speaker of the House so you could have leadership in place so you could actually move forward with Donald Trump as president of the United States. As I have made reference to, if we go down the path of insanity, which is, a protracted fight over Speaker of the House, if you don't have Congress sworn in, Congress can't certify the election results, which means Donald Trump would not be on track to be president of the United States. You have to have Congress in place to have Trump certified for him to be able to move forward. You get to January 20th and you don't have a Speaker of the House and you don't have the certification having taken place. Chuck Grassley, president of the United States. It's just absurd. So, yeah, it's all part of it. Let's go to Tom in Ridgecrest, California. Tom, welcome to the show. Hey, Tom. Do we have you, Tom? Yep. All right. Maybe Tom is not ready to go. So let's go to, we got Chris in Oklahoma City. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Hey, I was wanting to just talk to you about the debt again, more issues on the debt. But getting some feedback in my ear here, but the idea is single up and down issues on every bill. Massey brought this up the other day, and it was mentioned on X. But I've been saying it for years. All the pork, all the corruption, all the kickbacks, everything hides in the pork. So, forever I thought, well, if we just had a single up and down vote on every issue, that separates all of that stuff. The lobbyists can't get to the congressmen. Congressmen that are successful lawyers, doctors, and such don't go to Congress to make $187,000 a year. I believe if you took all their pay away, none of them would quit. So the talk about term limits, they're not going to term limit themselves, but they might do it if there's no money to be made above the $187,000 a year.
That's a good point. I mean, I've used the example that I would be willing to, take the congressional salary to $10 million a year if we made it so that you didn't have people that were playing the games that they've played to be able to, get rich at our expense. But yeah, I mean, look, there are a lot of ways that you can address this. One is, not having any baseline type budgeting approach. If you eliminated the whole idea of continuing resolutions as they currently exist, the idea of baseline budgeting, you actually had to create a budget for each of these agencies every year. If you had the leader of that agency that had to make a presentation, that certainly would change the ball game quite a bit. If you ended up having line item vetoes, one of the single biggest issues that I think we have is the lack of a line item veto, so that you don't have the executive that could go in there and get rid of some of those items, some of the pork. And, so there, as we're reimagining how the government can move forward, recommendations by DOJ and everything else, these are all ideas. So those are far more complicated because I do think, to your point, you're going to have a hard time getting majorities on board with them, especially with that super slim Republican majority in the House. But it all comes down to how unified the Republican conference is as well. Yeah, you still have filibuster considerations in the Senate, but what can be achieved here is historic if Republicans get behind the Trump agenda. And let's go to Nathan Nathan in Savannah, listening to my old station, WTKS. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Brian Mudd, what a pleasure to talk to you. I've got my point, and if I may make a pleasantry at the end. I'm talking to the base right now, Mark's Army. We need to not sit down. Trump has done his job. You've done your job. Mark's done his job. We need to, in the background now, the next 2 years, make sure that we vote out all the rhinos all across this country. Do not sit down. Everybody stand up, and let's work on voting out all these people that will not carry out the Trump agenda, because we know what's going on. Now, here's my pleasantry. I had the pleasure of meeting you in 2003. I picked up a bunch of Bush signs at WTKS with my concert tickets, and I gave you the nickname Boy Genius. And you are, man, you're so young and handsome, and we miss you here in Savannah, Georgia, and we also miss Bill Edwards because they took him out. But we love you so much, and we're so proud of you, Brian Mudd.
I appreciate that, Nathan. That is that is more than kind. I'm not as young as I used to be. 2003, to your point, I was pretty young back then. It's been a few years since then, so not quite as young, but always say, I remember you and super kind. Our old buddy, Bill Edwards. I was actually in touch with Bill just earlier today. Good man, and I love my old home of Savannah. So, yeah, I mean, look, this is a historic opportunity. There's a lot that we can be excited about. But to Nathan's point, we got to make sure that people are on board with the agenda. And the agenda isn't one's own agenda. It's Donald Trump's agenda. He'll tell us who the House Speaker should be. Right now, that's Mike Johnson. And until he says something differently, that's who it needs to be. So cut the crap, get on board, and let's get this thing done in 25 days. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
President-elect Trump believes the aid should stop.
Ukraine prepare for less aid from the United States after you're sworn into office?
Yeah, probably. Sure.
Aid for Ukraine is one of the reasons House Speaker Mike Johnson is on thin ice with some conservatives. He greenlit an aid package several months ago, but Johnson made sure there was no Ukraine money in the government funding bill last week. That would have been a poison pill to some Republicans. Mr. Trump and his former Secretary of State say a lack of leadership from President Biden exacerbated the war in Ukraine. They believe Europe should be responsible for its own security rather than the U.S.
That is Fox's Chad Pergram. And I was thinking about this just a minute ago. Yesterday for Christmas, had one of my cousins text me a picture. His daughter got this cup for Christmas. Says, I love when I wake up in the morning and Donald Trump is president. Amen to that one, right? And 25 days from now, that's going to be our reality. We are going to be able to make America great again in 2025. It is a year of action and one of optimism if we do the right thing. We voted the way we did. We gave Trump this mandate. He won the biggest election by a Republican since George H.W. Bush in 1988. Right now, and I think this is so instructive, he has his highest approval and favorability ratings that he's had at any point. In fact, they're even higher than they were on Election Day, meaning that this transition period right now, all the agenda items he's laying out, as people are hearing about them, you have even about 9% of Harris voters that have turned around and have gotten on board with him. He's well over 50% across the board, even on deportation, mass deportation. Once upon a time, you can imagine. And all this comes down to a couple of things. People get it. I've always said you can lie to people about policy, and those who are inclined to believe you will, but you can't lie to people about what is or isn't in their wallet because they know. That principle applies in so many different ways. The godless souls and slanderous news media, they lied and it didn't matter. They are less relevant than they have ever been. And Donald Trump is more popular, more emboldened, has a greater mandate than he's ever had before. And if this Republican Party unifies, what we have in front of us is going to be the greatest year politically in our lifetimes, one of the greatest years in the history of the United States of America. I'm here for it. Let's get it done. Make sure your congressman gets it done too. Been a pleasure. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.